I think you nailed it. It didn't work out, and it was a big miss for the Eagles, and there's no risk at all for the Vikings. I mean, they've got a guy that I know that they probably, like most people, thought of him as a pretty good player.
Yesterday, they got Chauncey Gardner-Johnson from the Saints, and they've upgraded I would say, the safety position because that's where they're probably going to play him with Bradbury and with Slay on the other side. So you've got versatility in there. And my friend Chris Landry from Landry Football will tell us right now, again, because first and foremost, Chris, I want to start out before we get into the offseason here, Jalen Reagor. You're down in that neck of the woods in New Orleans. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, how did he end up with the Philadelphia Eagles? I mean, was this just a salary move here, or was it the Honey Badger that cost them the opportunity? Do you think he's a good player? Give me your assessment of the whole move.
They couldn't get a long-term deal done with him, so they just wanted to. They've got depth at their position, and if they were, they didn't want to. They wanted to get something for him since they weren't able to extend him. So, and they've got a little bit of luxury there depth-wise. So, I think it was a combination of both, but mainly the fact that they couldn't get a long-term deal done. He has had a different idea of what his value was in a potential market, and we'll see going forward where that is. But they didn't want to go forward with him if they didn't have a long-term deal with him.
I have a lot of respect for Mickey Loomis as you do, Chris. I think he really does a nice job evaluating talent. Um, um, your thoughts on Chauncey Gardner-Johnson joining the Eagles? Is he a playmaker? Do you like him? Do you think that his versatility, you could play him in the nickel, you could play him in the slot, corner, safety? Give me your impression of him.
Yeah, no, I think he has some value. I think it's a good move for Philly. I think the key is going to be long term. Do you, can you get a deal done with him? You made a trade. Is it a 1 year deal? Or is it going to be one of those cases where he's going to have again the difference between what he values himself and maybe what the Eagles might. This could be a 1 year rental deal, in which case it's not as good of a deal. But that's the reason why they were not able to, they didn't want to move forward. But they've got a good player there. He's got versatility to play outside. I think he's physical. They just Saints have a little bit more depth than the Eagles do right now at that position.
Jalen Reagor being sent to the Minnesota Vikings, and obviously when you send a first round draft choice and you're getting a seventh rounder, you're obviously kind of waving the white flag on this thing here too. Both parties probably, Chris, right, needed to move on from one another. Reagor wasn't happening in Philadelphia. Now he gets an opportunity to be in a pass happy offense up there. Your impressions of the deal here with Reagor going to Minnesota?
I think you nailed it. It didn't work out, and it was a big miss for the Eagles, and there's no risk at all for the Vikings. I mean, they've got a guy that I know that they probably, like most people, thought of him as a pretty good player, and new change of scenery might benefit him. But again, if it doesn't, the Vikings haven't really lost anything. It's the Eagles' loss here, and they just move on, cut their ties for again a mistake that they'll probably regret for a while.
I said yesterday that the Philadelphia Eagles have the deepest roster in the NFC. Am I right or wrong when I say that?
I don't know that I go that far, although I think it's pretty deep. I don't think it's the best. I don't think they have as many. I don't think that they're a great roster, but I do like the depth. I think the
Chris, that's where I
versatility.
was. I don't think they have a lot of top three players except for
Yeah,
maybe in the O line. But I think depth wise, and as you know, this is the war of attrition. And the teams that you see on August 31 may not be the same team on January 1. So that's kind of you can win ball games. That's kind of what the Eagles did in 17. They kind of out attrition to you. You know what I mean?
yeah, and they may end up. It may end up being the key factor that puts them in a good position in the East because depth wise, outlast everybody. Now, are they good enough to go deep? That's where I would say no at this point. But such a long season, we don't know. I just think that they're if I was looking at the best teams in the NFC, I wouldn't put the Eagles in there. But I do think that their roster's pretty deep, definitely in the NFC East. And I really look at it because I don't like the Packers' depth, although I think that they're better. I'm just thinking about it. I think the Saints have good depth. Um, even a team like the Niners that are really good, and the Rams, depth wise, I like those teams better, but I don't know that they're deeper. So I think it's an interesting discussion. I don't know that it's going to get them as far as maybe some Eagles fans think, but I think they'll be pretty good. And who knows? Maybe they can win the division. I think the division is still fairly weak, but I think the Eagles have as good a chance as anybody.
I got to get to Jalen Hurts here now, and I've been saying this the whole time. Chris, just because you add A.J. Brown doesn't mean you all of a sudden learn how to read defenses and offenses and understand where to throw the ball, pre-snap stuff. We're only talking about 6 months ago where they just looked pathetic against that Buccaneer team. And with the way that the practices are right now, Chris, where you're in helmets and shorts a lot, you're hearing a lot of hyperbole coming out of the NovaCare Center where everyone is really giving kudos to everybody. But at the end of the day, this is going to come down to whether or not you think that Jalen Hurts is a guy who could take advantage of Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown and Dallas Goedert. Do you believe he's that guy?
I'm not convinced that he is. I don't know that he's a good enough passer. I think they've got to camouflage some of it with, getting him outside the pocket. And I think, you got to win there with the run game. I think you got to work with the boot game. I think you got to work with the high percentage passes. I think him winning from in the pocket consistently, working the vertical game, working the timing routes, that's not his strength. So I think you just have to kind of play it, um, in a way that is like any good coach does, work to his strengths, which again is to make some plays outside the pocket, give him half field reads. That's what you have to do. I think that's not unlike some teams have to work it. I think that Baltimore is another example of that. Has to do some of that. So you're going to have to play really well around him. I think you can win with Galen. I don't think he's a guy that's going to win for you, kind of carrying a team on his back as a passing team.
And Chris, I'm so happy that you said rolling him on half the field so it gives him a better chance being able to read defenses. Bill Walsh told me that years ago. Even people like Joe Montana, that was one of the reasons that when Montana was young in his career, held the pass in the back of the end zone to Clark was him rolling right, because Walsh always believed that, hey, let's let him learn how to read half the field before the whole field. And so, like, I would expect to see a lot of movement and creating passing lanes with Shane Steichen, who's now the play caller, to get him acclimated into passing. Because if they sit him back there, Chris, in a 7-step drop, I think it's a nightmare situation because I don't think he's good enough to do that yet.
Well, it's the timing aspect of a 7-step drop that's not a real fit for his style. And quite frankly, for a long time, it wasn't for Montana. You're right. They worked him on half-field reads for most of 3 years in San Francisco. That's when you develop quarterbacks. Now you throw them in and you say, go, and you got to get something done in half a season or you're a bust. It's not reality. It takes about 20 starts, to really evaluate a quarterback, good or bad. But I don't know that that's ever where you want to go with somebody like Jalen Hurts, as a pure drop back. I think you can do certain things off play action, but I think a lot of the West Coast stuff. I think that's some of what they're going to have to do in San Francisco with their young quarterback Trey Lance. But he may have some ability, some better pocket skills down the road that might have a little bit more potential. But yeah, I don't think you ask him to do a whole lot of that, and I don't think you run that type of offense. I think that they're gonna play it to his strengths, and that's what you have to do. If this is who you're gonna ride with, you gotta accentuate what a guy does well, and that's what I think he can do better.
This is where I think their advantage with what they've done in the offseason here by building this roster up and putting more talent on it, the Eagles. Taking a look at the rest of the NFC East here. I mean, the Cowboys, am I right, Chris? I mean, aging in the O line, Zeke is not the player he was 4 years ago, which takes away from play action for Dak. You lose now his security blanket with Amari Cooper. You've got injuries all over the wide receiver positions where even Tony Pollard is now out in the flanks out there in the slot catching passes. I mean, how do you see the Cowboys as they get ready for the upcoming season?
Yeah, speaking of depth, this is a team that's never had really good depth. They haven't really done a very good job over history allocating funds the right way. They tend to stargaze, and they tend to have some players that are really good, um, but they don't have a lot of options when those guys go down or another way to go around and beat you. So, I mean, if you look at all things kind of falling in place, which they rarely do in this league, as you well know, you could make a case for Dallas, but it's already started off bad, and I don't really like their chances. And a lot of it gets thrown on the coach, whoever the coach is, and now, but there's limitations there you have as a roster, and then there are limitations with regard to kind of what I call football culture. The players there, um, they they know the buck doesn't stop with the head coach, and that's a problem. So the accountability factor among players, it's different because in most teams we've seen this in Washington for years when Dan Snyder was very involved. And if the buck doesn't stop with the head coach, you got a problem. And I think their accountability factor is what's led to it. And that's why, people criticize the coaches. Well, you're not going to get a coach that is a proven disciplinarian, the buck stops with me type of guy that's going to take that job because it just doesn't work. So I think those are the limitations. But when they if things are clicking right, they can go through stretches, but there's no consistency there because there's not that good foundation of a football or operation. It's one of the glitzy glamour, organizations that doesn't have a lot of substance. Or I guess, as they would say in Texas, all hat, no cattle, or whatever that term is. It fits literally and figuratively there.
Chris, let me go back something on the Eagles here and ask you about Howie Roseman. Is it possible that a guy can learn? Because after getting the 3-year contract extension from the owner, and after they jettisoned Doug Peterson, it's his ship now. I mean, this is his boat. He's hired the assistant coaches. He's hired the personnel people inside the building. And what I've seen that he's done, his mistakes, he tries covering for him. He'll go out in free agency and get A.J. Brown because he bombed on the Reagor deal. Or he'll, like the edge rusher, Derek Barnett, complete bomb. They go out and get Hassan Reddick. And you see how economically sound that he is. He's getting these guys. And by the way, they're like the sixth youngest team now because they jettisoned all these 30-year-old guys off the team. And they got a lot of young guys on the football team. My point is, I guess, Howie just seems like a different guy since he's been given that 3-year contract now, and there's no Doug Peterson in the building. I mean, am I right?
Well, here's the thing about Howie, and we see more and more of those type of guys in the league. Howie's not from a football background, so he is really good as an administrator. He listens, or when he's been successful, he listens to the football people. The coaches basically kind of run the draft. Now Howie, comes across as a guy running. He's telling you about all that, but Howie can't go and sit there and look at film and say, "No, I disagree with you, receiver coach. This guy's better." He wouldn't know one from the other. But when he listens and he gets the good information and he makes it correctly, it works. The problem is, and it's fine to work that way. I grew up differently. I wanted as many good football people in the building as possible to have independent decisions. I don't give a flip if I don't want you to go on the other side of the building, see what the coach is thinking, because then there's no independent thinkers. Then you all go down a darn, path. Then, I want somebody to sit there and say, whoa, 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 whoa. We don't see these guys correctly. That's how you can avoid Jalen Reagor over J.J. Jefferson. You don't have enough football with when you have a GM that's not a football guy. All the GM can do is do what he can do, and that's organize and administrate. I tend to think while it is a business, football is a business, it's the business of football. So I want somebody that really has a strong background in scouting and evaluating that can sit there and hold up and have enough, credentials to where it holds up in the room. And nothing about the power. I mean, you wouldn't want somebody who's not a good evaluator of talent to overrule somebody who is. So he doesn't really do that. So and you see guys like that, and some of it has success, but it only has success if you have a lot of good people that can play that role for you. Which is why it's going to be more hit or miss. It's not going to be as consistent. I think, at times they've drafted pretty well. Mainly it's because, I'm going to be honest with you. There's no, I felt the same way about John Elway. John Elway had no background in coaching or scouting, but John did work some in administration. But other than recruiting Peyton Manning to come to the Broncos, what did he do? I mean, Foxy and those guys and Del Rio ran the drafts and got them Von Miller and made those decisions. It was Elway that kind of pulled the trigger on the 7 quarterbacks or so that he tried to draft.
Paxton Lynch's
They were
of the
awful.
world, all them
But
guys.
the point is, now that's a difference. People recognize, well, Harry Roseman doesn't have foot. Well, John Elway, who knows quarterbacks better than John Elway? Well, every evaluator that's had experience doing it, because being a great quarterback, maybe the best of all time, one of them, doesn't make you a great evaluator. So it's not just because I get this a lot of times. Well, you come from a coaching and scouting background, Landry, so you don't really like it. It's not that I dislike people. I like people with analytics and business. I want to have that in the building, but I want to have people, to me, that are ultimately going to be heavily intoned with making the decision to be able to go in the room and say, no, I think we got this wrong. And that matters. How we can't go in the room and say that. Nobody takes him seriously as an evaluator. He doesn't evaluate. That's not what he does. He comes with an opinion on a player based upon what he hears, not what he can see on film. And that's just a reality. It's not being, I don't mean it to sound rude. I'm not I've done a lot of contracts in this league. I'll be honest with you, Dan. I wasn't great at it. I didn't have a lot of patience, and I didn't like dealing with agents. So, I mean, it just wasn't my strength. Um, I think Howie's is. I think Howie's is listen to your football team, football people tell him this is where the value is. And I think I think Banner was that way too. Let's get these guys under contract based upon what the football people say. And I think they were very good at that.
And I think that's what Joe Douglas reminds me of also, that in with the Jets, he comes from that, and Andrew Berry too, in Cleveland. These guys, they look like the same clones of that, where that's why you see a lot of hit and misses with Howie's drafts. I mean, look, Chris, I'll even go here with you. Look at the 2020 draft. I mean, everyone's talking about the last 2 years. You and I know this. You truly get a true evaluation on a draft 3 years removed from it, not 2 minutes from it. And so when you're looking at that 2000, I mean, Jalen Reagor, there's some other dude. I mean, very few guys are from that draft are even on the team still.
Yeah, and here's the thing: and it's great. I always approached it as a collaborative effort with the coaches, but it was an effort of two people doing looking separately at the same players with the same type of credentials to evaluate. But if you have to listen, if you're the type that have to listen to other people in the building to tell you, Well, then what happens when those people leave? They get other jobs. They got new position coaches. Well, all of a sudden all of a sudden what you did before doesn't really fit, doesn't really work. That's why having somebody that is a stable force that's going to be there. If you're going to have a GM, he's going to be there. So all right, you lose your coordinator, you lose a couple of position coaches, then all of a sudden you got a completely different critical factors of how to evaluate a player at that position because the GM is not a football guy and they've got everything down from underneath them kind of filters through it. Here's the other thing is, I like my head coach to be a guy that can coach the coaches, Dan, that can go in and say to my D-line coach, Dan, hey, Dan, here's what I'm seeing and have the respect of that. Well, to me, this is me now, I want my GM to be able to scout the scouts and coach the scouts. How are you going to grow and develop and get continuity in evaluating if your top quote unquote evaluator is not an evaluator? And that's where I think it's difficult. So it's kind of like, okay, you can throw a head coach in Jimmy Johnson's a great example. Yeah, he had great coaches with him, but boy, he could sit there and he could kind of rein in a Butch Davis or a Wani or somebody. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He had been there and he was really good at it. He wasn't a figurehead guy. Well, I think GMs that if you're going to have good GMs, you've got to have people that have been a scout, have been on the road, that knows how to evaluate players, that maybe been a pro personnel director, although and been good at it. Because just because you've done it doesn't mean you're good at it, but be good at it to where you're not just, well, what do you think? But it is, all right, what you think, but then you also know how to evaluate it because you've done what they've done. If it's what do you think? If I ask somebody on the football side what they think, I can relate. But if I ask them about things I don't know about, then that becomes a big problem. I think that's what happens with some of these folks.
How about this? Finally, here, Carson Wentz. What are you expecting in Washington? You know what? I was listening to somebody earlier today. There was a stretch last year when you watched Wentz play from maybe week 4 to week 14, where you could have made the argument he was one of the better quarterbacks in the NFL when you look at the numbers: 27 touchdowns, 7 picks, 94 quarterback rating. And then you had these enormously awful moments like you had in the Titans game where you see maybe the worst 8 minutes in the history of football with, the pick 6, or you watch the last 2 games of the year, Chris. This kid's got talent. Why can't he put it all together? What's the missing ingredient, do you think, in Carson Wentz's repertoire that he just can't fix it?
I think the parallels that I see in guys like Carson and others that have been similar have talent, but can you produce consistently? Comes under a number of different areas. Well, it's maybe instability in organizations, and how good of a team you are around them. When I look at the development and the growth of players, let's look at the good ones that have turned out well. Let's take like a Josh Allen of Buffalo, Patrick Mahomes of the Jets. I think Justin Herbert's getting there. And there are others, but I just throw out those 3. What's a common denominator? Teams are pretty good. Teams are well coached. There's some stability, and there's growth. It wasn't always good, but there was a slow, steady growth. And I think what happens with quarterbacks, I think we've seen this with Matthew Stafford. Matthew Stafford looked a little different last year, didn't he?
No, you bet. Better coaching.
Well, yeah, and a better team. So when you're with the Detroit Lions and you're trailing by 17 points in the third quarter, what are you going to do, Dan? I mean, he's going to ingrain in bad habits. He's going to try to make a play, make something that's not there. And why did he make a bad decision? Because he's trying to make a play. He's not worried about losing by 17. He's trying by losing more than 17. He's trying to figure out a way to win a game. I think this happens at times. So with a guy like Wentz, they've got to get better around him, and they've got to coach the bad plays out of him. And basically the way you do it is, throwing the football up for grabs in the edge is not the play we ever want. Okay, and I get it. I mean, it's fourth down and it's the last play. I get that, but last play of the game. Just don't try to be a hero and build off the good things. But you've got to have good protection. You got to have a good running game then balanced. You got to have good route progressions. You've got to have good defenses and special teams to put you in good field position. A lot of times a good series and a bad series is play calling, and play calling has a lot to do with field position and your trust in your defense. I don't think people look at that enough. They tend to separate offense and defense. You know this, how they work together. They're separate that work together. They're tied to one another. How you play one side affects how you play another. I don't know that there's a fix there. I mean, I wouldn't want to put him on a team like if I had a contender and I needed to win a big play. I don't know that he's ready yet because I think he's been improperly prepared to this point. I think they're trying to create some stability, but I still look at the roster and I see a good defensive line, but still not a very good defense overall that's good enough. And I don't see enough components. An offensive line that's got some talent. So I just think that's the key is create that stability and improve coaching, and we'll see if they can provide that. I think too many guys in your ear, it retards the development of any young player.
Chris, where can people get your work? Because the upcoming season, I can't wait to see how this year is going to play out, man. I mean, especially on the NFC side where I think it's wide open for so many people. How can they get a hold of your stuff?
LandryFootball.com. It's a coaching and scouting perspective on the NFL, on college football. We break down players, teams, coaches, schemes at both the college and NFL level. It's like having your own scouting department, coaching department for less than a magazine subscription. So check it out. All the game breakdowns, all the team breakdowns. You can also get all our podcasts there as well. So check it out. If you like football, we think you'll love LandryFootball.com.
Absolutely. Chris, we've been friends for a long time. I turn to you. Thank you so much, my friend.
Thank you. Enjoy the start of the season. We'll talk soon.
All right. Please hit the like button. Don't forget, my friends, our friends at Morgan & Morgan, where the fee is free, means this. They do not get paid unless you do. For the people is not a slogan. It's who they are. This is who John Morgan's company, Morgan & Morgan, are. Make no mistake about it. The biggest law firm in the United States of America is there to protect you and your family. To the tune of $13.5 billion over the last 30 years. 800 attorneys and offices in Philly, New York, and in Florida are ready to do battle for you. That's right. Call them at 800-512-1600. That's 800-512-1600. And when you call Morgan & Morgan, do me a favor. Tell them Big Sil sent you.
When choosing a lawyer for your injury case, you may ask, does the size of the law firm matter? Well, of course it does. The insurance company, they're huge with unlimited resources. And whether your case is big or small, they're built to bully you out of the money you're owed. But here's the good news. We're big too, the biggest actually. And we're built to fight to make them pay for all that was taken from you. Size is our strength. There's only one Morgan & Morgan, forthepeople.com.